They used to argue about everything. Whose turn it was to do the dishes, whether they left the porch light on too long, what time they were supposed to leave for her sister's birthday. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cruel. It was just two people who cared enough to say what they actually thought. Then, somewhere in the last few months, it stopped. No more raised voices, no more slammed cabinet doors, no more "we need to talk," just quiet. Most people would call that progress, maturity. Two adults who finally figured out how to get along. But something about it didn't sit right with her. Not because the silence was hostile. It wasn't. It was the opposite. It was calm in a way that felt unfamiliar, like the relationship had been put on mute. And the question she couldn't shake was this: if they weren't fighting anymore, why didn't it feel like they'd gotten closer? There is a version of every relationship where the fighting stops. And it means exactly what people hope it means. The couple worked through their friction. They learned each other's rhythms. They found a way to disagree without it turning into a war. That version exists. It's real, and it's worth wanting. But there is another version, quieter, harder to notice, and far more common than people realize, where the fighting doesn't stop because the relationship healed. It stops because one or both people simply gave up trying to be heard. From the outside, both versions look identical. Two calm people, no yelling, no slammed doors. The difference isn't in what you can see, it's in what's happening underneath. Picture two people at a dinner table. Plates in front of them, phones face down, the television off out of habit rather than intention. A year ago, this same dinner might have turned into an argument about something small, a comment taken the wrong way, a tone that sounded sharper than it was meant to. They would have pushed back, defended themselves, maybe raised their voices, and 20 minutes later, they would have been laughing about something else entirely, the argument already dissolving into the rest of the evening. Tonight, one of them says something slightly annoyed, a small jab about being late again. The other one doesn't respond. Not with anger, not with an apology, just nothing. A small nod, a change of subject. The comment lands and it disappears, like it was never said at all. This is the moment nobody warns you about. Not the explosive fight, not the dramatic confrontation. Just a sentence that used to start something, landing instead on silence. Here's the part most people misunderstand. Silence is not one thing. It has different origins, and those origins matter more than the silence itself. There is the silence of resolution. Two people who talked something through so many times that they no longer need to relitigate it. That silence is earned. It comes after effort, not instead of it. And there is the silence of exhaustion, where one person stopped bringing things up not because the problem disappeared, but because bringing it up stopped feeling worth it. Those two silences can look completely identical from across a dinner table. The only way to tell them apart is to ask what came before them. Did the couple talk it out, or did one of them just stop talking? Most people are taught to see conflict as the enemy of a good relationship. Fewer arguments, healthier relationship. That's the assumption almost everyone carries into adulthood. But relationship researchers who study couples over long stretches of time have consistently found something that goes against that assumption. It isn't the presence of conflict that predicts whether a relationship survives, it's what happens during that conflict. And what happens when conflict disappears entirely. Psychologist John Gottman, who spent decades observing how couples argue, identified specific behaviors during conflict that reliably predicted relational breakdown. Contempt, defensiveness, criticism, and a fourth pattern that matters most here: stonewalling. That's when one partner emotionally shuts the exchange down, going quiet, disengaging, physically or mentally checking out of the conversation rather than continuing it. Stonewalling doesn't look like a threat. It looks like calm. That's exactly why it's so easy to mistake for peace. An argument means two people are still reaching for each other, even if the reaching is clumsy and frustrated. Withdrawal means someone has stopped reaching altogether. There's a concept from early attachment research that explains something almost nobody connects to their adult relationships. When a securely bonded child is separated from a caregiver, they protest, they cry, they reach, they make noise. That protest isn't a flaw. It's the nervous system trying to restore closeness. The child is essentially saying, "Come back. This distance is unacceptable to me." But if the separation continues long enough, without a response, the protest eventually stops. Not because the child no longer needs the caregiver, but because the nervous system has learned that protesting doesn't bring anyone back. Adults do a version of the same thing in relationships. Early frustration, early complaints, even early arguments, they're often a form of protest. A way of saying, without necessarily meaning to, I still expect this to be repaired. I still think you'll respond. When someone stops protesting altogether, it isn't always because the relationship got better. Sometimes it's because they stopped expecting a response. The fighting wasn't the crisis. The fighting was the attempt to fix something. The real crisis is what happens after the attempts run out. Here's where it gets complicated, because both people in a quiet relationship are usually experiencing something different, and both are usually misreading it. The partner who went quiet often believes they're protecting the relationship. They've told themselves that bringing things up just causes more friction, more hurt feelings, more of the same unresolved argument on repeat. So they stop bringing it up. In their mind, this is patience, restraint, choosing peace over conflict. The other partner, meanwhile, often reads that same silence as a sign that things have finally settled down. Fewer disagreements, fewer hard conversations. It feels, on the surface, like relief. Neither partner is lying to themselves out of malice. They're both interpreting the same behavior through two completely different emotional lenses, and neither of them is checking whether their interpretation is correct. That's the trap. Not dishonesty, assumption. Not every quiet relationship is in trouble. That has to be said clearly, because otherwise this becomes fear-mongering instead of insight. Some couples genuinely do reach a point where friction resolves itself faster, where old triggers stop being triggers, where two people simply understand each other well enough that conflict rarely needs to escalate. That's not avoidance, that's growth. The distinction usually comes down to a few honest questions. Does either partner still bring up things that bother them, even small things, and feel like it's actually heard? When something does come up, does it get resolved or does it just get dropped? Do both people still feel comfortable disagreeing out loud, or has one of them quietly decided it's easier not to? Couples who've grown past conflict can usually answer those questions with confidence. Couples who've simply gone quiet often can't. And the moment they're asked, there's a pause before the answer, because some part of them already knows. There's a modern layer to this pattern that earlier generations didn't have to navigate in quite the same way. Busy schedules, constant notifications, the low hum of being available to everyone except the person across the room. All of it creates a kind of relationship where two people can share a home, a bed, a routine, and still go days without an actual conversation that requires vulnerability. It's easier than ever to coexist without connecting. Text messages replace conversations. Good morning replaces how are you actually? A relationship can run entirely on logistics. Who's picking up groceries, whose turn it is with the kids, without either person noticing that the emotional part of the relationship went quiet months ago. In that environment, silence doesn't stand out. It blends in. It looks like every other exhausted, overscheduled evening, which is exactly why it's so easy to miss until it's already deeply rooted. Here is the insight underneath everything else in this story. Fighting in its healthiest form is not the opposite of love. It's evidence of investment. It's two people who still believe the relationship is worth the discomfort of confrontation. The real danger was never the argument. The real danger is what it means when someone quietly decides the argument isn't worth having anymore. Not because the issue resolved, but because they've stopped believing it will. That's not peace. That's resignation wearing peace's clothes. And the couples who last aren't the ones who never disagree. They're the ones who keep choosing to say the uncomfortable thing again and again, long after it would be easier to just let it go quiet. She still notices it sometimes, how calm the house feels now, how rarely a raised voice interrupts the evening. Most nights, she almost convinces herself this is what peace looks like. But every so often, in the middle of an ordinary silence, she catches herself waiting for him to bring something up, waiting for a version of the old argument that would at least prove he still expected a response. It doesn't come, and she's starting to understand that the loudest warning a relationship can give isn't a fight. It's the moment two people stop trying hard enough to have one. If you've ever mistaken a quiet relationship for a healthy one, you're not alone. And the good news is that noticing it is the first step toward changing it. If you want to understand more of the psychology behind what's really happening beneath the surface of modern relationships, subscribe to The Connection Theory.